other times on my own with another group of volunteers. And let me tell you, expectations are very, very high. Beyond the campaign, beyond winning phenomenally, people want to see results. And it must start with the handing over. So certainly the economy will play a very pivotal role. The laws and legislations that Mr. Mahama has promised to take a second look at, the Fiscal Act, which will actually put a fetter on the reckless borrowing that we've seen. Because remember, all they did was go to the international markets until they were literally locked out. And then they had to look home. Then suddenly, Seth Tekpe's blueprint now took center stage about homegrown solutions. Mr. Mahama has his knack on what we need to do. That $10 billion approach would also invest fully in industrializing our country. And the private sector should really take advantage. He has promised that there will be a 24-hour economic committee set up immediately. In the coming days, you will hear more about these things. The Operation Recover All Looted Assets. And you've heard many assets. The state capture was real. Who was respecting the sovereignty of the state? Who was respecting the sovereignty of the people? Who was respecting what it is that we should leave for generations yet unborn? Nobody. You know, look, we have many beautiful legislations in this country. Serious resources are expended on promulgating these laws. How do they serve the generality of the people? Who monitors how they use them? Look, sometimes they just cover ducks and nobody even goes out there to use them. Today, we want a consolidation, an entire reform of the tax regime. Because what is it that we do as citizens? People actually work on tax avoidance. They are willing to pay consultants to avoid tax than to pay tax. In other jurisdictions, people take pride in paying their taxes because the currency is stable. The currency is consistent. The exchange rates are stable and reliable. The banking system works as it should. This is the only country, this side of the world, where the economic indices work in the completely opposite direction. If we can return the curve to where it should be, where demand moves supply and supply moves demand, certainly basic economics will repair the weak fundamentals. If we cut expenditure, especially wasteful expenditure.
Many have been reading online when we published that red flag that you raised earlier about some of these emerging challenges. Exactly what are these concerns and in what form or shape are they taking?
Well, there have been widespread reports of payments, of signing of contracts, of recruitment, and other such activity which have been done on the blind side of the incoming government. Now, this raises significant concern because most of these activities have substantial fiscal implications, which essentially means that it is the incoming government that will be saddled with the responsibility for bearing the financial cost of these activities. For that reason, it is only fair and proper that the inputs of the incoming administration is sought in the taking of some of these decisions. And this is a matter that is actually precedented, it has a precedent. Indeed, at the meeting today, a member of the NDC side of the transition team raised similar concerns that Mr. Osafo-Mafu raised in December of 2016 during the transition. Indeed, Mr. Osafo-Mafu actually wrote a letter to the then Chief of Staff, Mr. Joseph Zebra, indicating that they thought that every single major decision that was to be taken must be taken with the full agreement and acceptance of the incoming government. So one would have thought that having set this precedent and having drawn attention to this, the NPP government would itself be minded in following suit so that they don't do things on the blind side of the incoming government. We have had evidence of recruitment in GRA, Bank of Ghana, and other places. There's evidence of an impending payment of over 240 million Ghana cedis to an entity by the Electricity Company of Ghana. Now, these are major payments that will have a fiscal impact on the incoming government. And for a country whose finances are in shambles and whose economy has been run down such that we are unable to pay debt, it is important that these things are done with the buy-in and acceptance of the incoming government, so that no surprises are sprung on us when we take over power. Because when an entity like this doles out this substantial amount of money, it has the potential to create problems for the incoming government. And when you do recruitment, two things happen. It is the incoming government that will bear responsibility for paying those that you are recruiting. Also, it essentially amounts to imposing personnel on the incoming administration. For that reason, the incoming administration must be aware of these movements so that it factors them in its own plans when it takes over. But these things have been done without any input, without consultation, without recourse to the president-elect and his team. And we have only discovered them through the instrumentality of some public sector individuals who have drawn attention to these matters. So it created serious concern for us, and we raised it forcefully at today's meeting. The response of the Chief of Staff was that the matter be shelved pending the reconvening of the Transition Committee's meeting on Friday. So the also suggested that in view of the critical nature of these matters, a subcommittee be set up to look into the matter so that consensus is reached and that we find common ground on how to proceed. But our position is that until such common ground is found, all these recruitments and payments and contracts should be put on hold so that we have sufficient time to carry out appropriate scrutiny.
And Felix, sorry for cutting through, but when you make that point, that's when you're being questioned on the legal remit within which the NDC's transition team is making that call. At the Transition Act, do you have any sort of grounding, legal remit within which you're making this call? Because the president is still president until January 7th.
That may be true, but there's something called sound judgment. There's fairness. Now, elections are held. A new government is about to take over. 3 weeks to that government taking over, you cannot take major decisions that bind that government, especially in financial terms. It was the same principle that guided the MPP's position in 2016. Why did Mr. Osafo write that letter to Honorable Julius Debra if he thought that there was something illegal about seeking the consent and inputs of the incoming administration? It is only fair that the government that is to take over within a short space of time is made aware of these matters, because its own program or these recruitments, these payments, and other activities must fit into that government's program. Because at the end of the day, when that government takes over, they will be responsible for managing the finances of this country. The last thing you want is for them to be saddled with programs. It is not for nothing that even appropriation and disbursements of public funds and the budgeting process only makes room for 3 months of expenditure for the incoming government. So in March, the incoming government would have to, as it were, present a new budget to cover that fiscal year. And even with that 3 months budget that is prepared, it is only statutory payments, that is commitments in terms of debt servicing and salaries that are allowed. And it is the incoming government must have a say in the major decisions that are taken in the period preceding the time that they come into office.
I get it. Now, if the president decides to go ahead with the payment or to approve the payment, what then will happen?
Well, I think that reason would prevail, and the president and the MPP administration will find it necessary to put on hold these payments and recruitments pending further consultation and scrutiny by the NDC side. We reserve the right as a government when we take over to review these transactions and see whether they are in the national interest, so that the public purse is safeguarded, so that we are not blindsided and committed to things that may be injurious to the public finances.
I see. And Felix, it's been a long day for you, but one last thing before I let you go. We do know that as part of the functions, looking at the Transition Act, which I was just pointing out to earlier, the requirements on both sides will then have to deal with issues of payments of benefits, pensions, privileges, which is a core function of the transition team. President-elect, I should say, John Dramani Mahama, has made that categorical statement that ex gratia will not be released. But it's part of the core functions of the Transition Act. Have you taken a stance on that as the NDC's side on the
Mahama stance on that is quite clear. He has said that under his government, nobody who works under him should look forward to being paid ex gratia. So it is binding on people who work under him. At this moment, the government that is in place is not President Mahama's government. One would have thought that they will find reason to side with President Mahama on this matter and demonstrate commitment to protecting the public purse and showing that the ruling class is prepared to make requisite sacrifices, especially in view of the state of our finances. But if they decide to go ahead with it, there's little that President Mahama can do, bearing in mind that the law would not permit him to stop the payment. But when he becomes president, anybody who serves under him cannot look forward to being paid as gratia. So that is
so you're going to release without any undue delay, as the law says.
No, that money,
right?
That money is ring-fenced. Often it is even released before the new government takes over. But if it were left to President Mahama alone, that money would not be paid, especially if the people who are to receive that money are people who serve under him. So that essentially is important. The promise he made relates to his own government.
You have an absolute majority, 2/3. You could, go by that, bypass the system.
But it is a constitutional issue. It's a constitution. Until the constitution is amended, that cannot be done. So at this stage, it is only moral suasion which we can use to compel President Akufo-Addo to stand down on the payment of ex gratia. It is something that we in the NDC will support, given our position on the matter.
And will you be laying that before the transition team?
But of course, it was raised today at the meeting. It was raised today at the meeting. But the point I'm making is that President Mahama, at this moment, does not have the power to stop that payment. What he has the power to do is to stop it when his government has taken over and members of his government are leaving office in, say, 2028. That is when he can, as it were, enforce this commitment that he has made to the people of Ghana. Currently, the honors lies on President Akufo-Addo to lead by example and show that he has some sympathy and sensitivity towards the plight of the ordinary Ghanaian and stand down on the payment of ex gratia. But I must place it on record, and we must be very clear that when President Mahama says he will not pay ex gratia, it is in relation to his government, members of his government. At this stage, he does not have the power or the constitutional mandate to do so. Right.
And just deal with this for me in a minute as you go. The point about inventory of government assets, vehicles. We've seen a statement from the presidency, and perhaps we might put that on the screens right now, a clear directive signed by the Director of Communications at the presidency, pointing out clearly what ought to be done. The directive is that all government vehicles be submitted be returned by January 3, I believe, and you have excerpts of the statement on the screens now. Looking at this directive and juxtaposing that to what's happening across the country, where allegedly some NDC folk are protecting, as it stands now, state assets, as they're calling it. Would you say that this should put an end to some of the attacks on individuals and state installations?
That matter is a pure law and order issue.
Right.
It is the responsibility of the security agencies to ensure that anybody breaching the public peace or acting in a manner that undermines the peace and security of the state is dealt with. At this stage, the NDC is not in power. The most we can do is to urge our supporters, that is, if it is even proven that it is NDC supporters who are engaged in this act, to refrain from it. Beyond that, it is the duty of the police or any other organization whose help they may require to quell these acts of lawlessness. And President Mahama has been clear in his condemnation of these acts of lawlessness. It is surprising that those who have the power to act are not acting and are only lamenting. But as for the statement that nobody should take away a state asset. I think it is in order. It is in line with President Mahama's own position on the matter. He says when he becomes president, nobody who serves under him should dream of buying an auctioned vehicle. That is a vehicle used by the person before leaving office. That is simply not going to happen. It is gratifying to note that President Akufo-Addo has a similar position on the matter. One would have wished that he had a similar position on the matter of El Gracia too. It would then have completed the loop. At this stage, we can only wait and see.
All right then, and of course you can tell from Felix's voice that it's been a long day for him. Go get some sleep. We're grateful for your time here on PM Express. Felix Ofosu-Kwakye speaking on behalf of the NDC's transition team. But all of this is happening because the New Patriotic Party has lost the 2024 presidential and, I must say authoritatively, the parliamentary elections as well. Let's bring in Professor Gachi, who's also joining us from the University of Cape Coast. We also have Professor Smart Sapon from KNUST and the Executive Director for Global Info Analytics, Musa Dankwa, joining the conversation. Prof, I just want to start off with you on the last bit of it, emerging issues surrounding some huge payments to an entity that is, I guess, the ECG has to pay. Is this a surprise to you, or you feel that the NDC ought to just allow that to pass for the payments to be made? Because possibly there could be an implication for the energy sector, which is already reeling under heavy debt.
Well, I think generally, as part of good governance practices, this transition period is actually a period for winding up. So if the debt in question is something that have been delivered on a contract and that those people deserve the amount to be paid to them, it's just a matter of explaining for the new team to understand how needful it is to pay GA and should not be allowed to proceed. So we should look at it from the point of view is that the government is in a winding up. It ought not to take up activities that will have financial implication for the incoming government.
I see. Let's get to it because the aftermath of the 2024 presidential election is, putting up a very key issue about the economy. And that's why we're grateful that you're an economist, so you understand what's going on. Ahead of the elections, Global Info Analytics had predicted that the economy was on top of the key issues the electorates were, and that on January 7, John Mahama takes over.
Well, I think the point has been made very clearly during the campaigning period that John Mahama will pursue a 24-hour economy. The implication of that is to focus on production and productivity of the Ghanaian economy, is to scale up the existing business capacity and also bring on board new businesses and also contribute to the growth of the economy and revenue in general, and actually make the Ghanaian economy a productive economy. I believe that is the essence, and that is what should be the focus of the government. And of course, the government needs to maintain the confidence that is reposed in it by ensuring that it starts with fiscal policy measures that will resonate very well with the people. In the NDC manifesto, we have seen what the government wants to do regarding the grant of exemption, linking exemption to job creation, technology transfer, and also having a means of measuring the delivery of institution or businesses that receive tax exemptions. So if those things start with if those implementations start from day one, then that will actually give some confidence to the people.
The key surprise element there is about how voluntary this exercise would be, because the president-elect John Mahama has spoken about that he wants the private sector to elect to be part of this exercise. Do they have an option, given what's happening to the Ghanaian economy?
I think the word voluntary was used in context.
Right.
if what is supposed to be done by the government is done, is motivating enough, the private sector will rally and participate in the 24-hour economy. The private sector is always galvanized, push forward to do things for the economy when they receive the needed incentives. So when the needed incentive is given, nobody will be forcing the private sector to participate in a 24-hour economy. So you cannot force anybody that implement 24-hour economy, but you can incentivize everybody to choose to participate in a 24-hour economy. That is the context of the word voluntary.
Indeed, a very interesting point there to note. Professor Gachi, just hold on for us, because Professor Smart Sapong made the projection that it was going in the favor of the New Patriotic Party, and that despite all of the challenges, the key campaign messaging and approach of the NPP would have worked. But what went wrong, Professor Smart Sapong? The fact that you had projected that the NPP's message was being received by the people of Ghana?
Well, good evening to your good self and our cherished viewers. So, two things, if you ask me. One, because as I said in my address earlier, the frequency of my expected study could not come on because I missed out on two different study periods due to the demise of my mother, which took most of my time in the year. So I got the opportunity to do one in October. I started in October 16th and terminated in November 16th. And that is what I reported. One may be because of time lapse between the time of the data collection and then the time of the elections. And we all agree that time plays a serious role in the outcomes of elections research. Then number two, I did a turnout effect model. And if you saw in my report, the condition for the outcomes I shared was hinged largely on turnout. The estimated turnout, 81.4%, was based on the trends that we have, and then the data that I took in respect of persons who were willing to vote as compared to 2022, and then the trend that we already have. So having chosen that baseline and then satisfying that, or the early voting confirming it, or the special voting confirming